The screaming started at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Zeke knew the exact time because he'd learned to read clocks the way other kids learn to read moods. 3:47 meant his stepfather Robert had just gotten home from work. 3:47 meant the house would shake. 3:47 meant Zeke needed to become invisible.
Hello, if you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and tap the notification bell. Type in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as touching as this one, or maybe even crazier. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's begin.
Zeke sat on his bedroom floor in Boulder, Colorado, a room that was supposed to be safe, with posters of soccer players and a bookshelf his mother had painted sky blue when she still smiled, and listened to the sounds traveling up through the floorboards like they were coming through water. His mother's voice first, cautious. "Robert, I didn't know you'd be home early." Then his voice, sharp as broken glass. "You didn't know? You didn't know because you weren't paying attention. You never pay attention." A crash. Something ceramic. The vase his mother had bought at the farmer's market last spring. The one she'd put wildflowers in because wildflowers made her happy. Zeke's 8-year-old body went rigid. His hands balled into fists so tight his fingernails bit crescents into his palms. He'd learned this response before he'd learned multiplication, before he'd learned to tie his shoes. The body remembers violence before the mind understands it. "Don't touch me," his mother's voice now, brittle and small. "Don't touch you?" Robert's laugh was the sound of something dying. "I'll touch you however I want. This is my house. You're my wife. You do what I say." The impact came next. Not a sound so much as a feeling. The vibration of a body hitting something solid. Zeke knew that feeling. His body knew it like a language. He moved on autopilot, the way traumatized children do. He turned up his music, his iPhone speaker playing a YouTube video about sharks, loud enough to distort, but not loud enough to provoke. Loud enough to pretend. Loud enough to survive the next hour. His mother would be bruised by dinner. By Wednesday morning, the bruises would darken to plum and yellow. By Thursday, she'd wear a scarf and say she'd fallen off the porch. By Friday, she'd smile at her teacher, and Zeke would see the lie in her eyes and die a little inside. He was 8 years old, and he already understood that adults didn't help. Adults looked away. Adults had their own problems. This was the rhythm of his life. This was normal. 300 miles away, Jack Reeves sat at a bar called the Pit Stop and didn't taste his beer. He was 42 years old and had the kind of face that made people cross the street, weathered, scarred, a nose that had been broken so many times it had given up trying to heal straight. His hands were massive, tattooed with the insignia of the motorcycle club he'd been a part of for 23 years. His leather jacket was older than some marriages, worn soft in places from decades of wind and rain and the kind of living that left marks. He felt nothing. This was not a metaphor. Jack had stopped feeling things around the time his daughter had stopped calling him, 6 years ago when she was 16 and figured out that his father was a criminal. Since then, he'd been operating on autopilot. Club business, club loyalty, club hierarchy. Drinks, bikes, the occasional woman who didn't ask questions. But nothing that required him to care. Nothing that required him to be human. His president, a man called Diesel, though that wasn't his real name anymore, nobody used real names anymore, was talking about territory disputes. Jack nodded at appropriate intervals. He'd been nodding at appropriate intervals so long it felt like acting, and he'd gotten too comfortable with the performance to remember the difference. "You listening, Jack?" Diesel leaned forward, and he could see the calculation in his eyes. Testing. Always testing. "Yeah." "You sure? Because you got that look, that dead look." Jack took a long pull of his beer and didn't respond. The dead look was appropriate. The dead look was safe. The dead look meant you weren't a liability. Cruz, one of the younger bikers, maybe 30 with the kind of idealism that hadn't been beaten out of him yet, tried to lighten the mood. "Come on, man, it's Friday. We should celebrate. The Broncos are playing Sunday." "I don't give a shit about football," Jack said flatly. "You used to." Jack didn't respond. That was the problem with being part of a club for so long. People remembered who you used to be, and they expected you to care about the discrepancy. His phone buzzed, a text from his ex-wife. "Maya's graduation is next month. She asked if you'd come. I said I'd ask." He deleted it without responding. His daughter was 18 now, graduating high school, and he was a stranger to her. Better that way. Cleaner. Safer. The bar was dark, the way that all biker bars are dark, designed to keep out the light, to keep in the smoke, to create a world where the rules outside don't apply. Neon beer signs cast everything in shades of red and blue, like they were all underwater, like they were all drowning and just hadn't noticed. Jack finished his beer, ordered another. This was his life now. This was all it would ever be. At 4:23 p.m., Robert's hand connected with Diane's face. Not a slap, a closed fist, knuckles first. She went down hard, her hip slamming into the kitchen counter. The pain was white-hot and immediate, but not as immediate as the terror. The terror was always faster. The terror lived in her nervous system like a permanent resident. "You embarrassed me." Robert's voice was calm now, which was worse than when it was loud. Calm meant he'd made a decision. Calm meant this would continue. "I'm sorry," she whispered from the floor. "Sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you're a liability." Her left eye was already starting to swell. She could feel it happening, the inflammation beginning, the world starting to compress from one side. By tomorrow, she'd look monstrous. By tomorrow, Zeke would ask questions and she'd have to manufacture another story. She thought about calling someone. Her sister had left 3 voicemails this month. "Diane, we're worried. We miss you. Can you just call us back?" Her best friend from college had sent a Facebook message. "I saw your profile picture. Are you okay? You look sad." She was sad. She was terrified. She was a woman who had once wanted to be a graphic designer, who had dreams of opening her own studio, who had believed in love and partnership and the possibility of beauty in her life. Now she was a woman on a kitchen floor with a swelling eye, calculating how many lies she'd have to tell to protect the person hurting her. Zeke was upstairs. He was always upstairs during these moments, and she was grateful for that and ashamed of her gratitude. No child should have to hide from their own home. Robert was getting angrier, not calmer. That was the pattern. The calm was just the eye of the storm. "Get up," he said. She got up. What happened next would be difficult to articulate later, but Diane would try. She would tell the therapist eventually, the social worker eventually, the judge eventually. He pushed her into the refrigerator. She hit her head. He was screaming about her incompetence, her failure as a wife, her failure as a mother. She was screaming for him to stop. And then Zeke came downstairs. The gas station was called Sinclair's, a small family-owned place on the edge of Boulder where the mountains were visible if you knew where to look. Jack was there because his bike needed gas and because the pit stop was too full of people asking questions he didn't want to answer. He was pumping fuel, not thinking about anything in particular. His mind had learned to be blank, a useful skill, when he saw them. 4 bikes pulling up hard, gravel spraying. His crew, Tommy, Cruz, Diesel, and Reno. They had apparently decided to track him down and drag him somewhere. This happened sometimes. Club business didn't wait for moods. Jack didn't turn around immediately. He finished pumping, paid the kid at the register, who looked terrified, which was good. It meant they'd maintain order, and was walking back to his bike when he heard it. A scream that didn't sound like an adult scream. It was thin, fractured, the kind of scream that comes from a child's throat when that child has already screamed so many times that year that his body has forgotten how to make a full sound. It was a scream that had been practiced, refined, perfected in terror. "They're hitting my mama! They're hitting my mama! Help! Help! Somebody help!" Jack turned his...
A kid, maybe 8, maybe 9, small for his age, with dark curly hair and a face streaked with tears, was running directly toward them. Directly toward 4 of the most dangerous-looking men in Boulder County. Directly toward the bikers like they were the only lifeline in a drowning world. The child was screaming without shame, without the learned behaviors of self-protection, just pure animal desperation. "They're hitting my mama!" The kid was 10 feet away now, closing distance. "Please, please help me. My mama's bleeding, and he won't stop, and I can't make him stop, and..." Jack didn't think. He wasn't built for thinking in moments like this. He was built for action, for the visceral response, for the thing that lived underneath all the numbness. He stepped forward and caught the child as he collapsed. For the first time in 6 years, since his daughter had stopped speaking to him. Jack felt something move in his chest, something that had been calcified by apathy and violence and the careful construction of a life without feeling. It felt like his heart starting again. Where? Jack's voice came out rough, unused. Where's your mom? But Zeke was already pointing. A residential street 3 blocks away, the kind of street where neighbors minded their own business and windows stayed closed, and nobody asked questions about the sounds that came from behind closed doors. We're going, Jack said to his crew, already moving toward his bike. Jack, what the fuck? Diesel started. We're going, now! And something in Jack's voice, something that sounded like the man he used to be before everything died, made them follow.
The world slowed down. Time did this thing in moments of crisis. It stopped being linear and became something else entirely. Jack's mind, which had been blank for so long it felt like looking at white noise, suddenly became hyper-aware of everything. The weight of the child in his arms, the exact timbre of the screams still echoing in the air, the smell of gasoline and fear sweat and childhood terror. The look on his crew's faces, confusion giving way to something harder, something that looked like purpose. "Hold on, buddy," Jack said to Zeke, and his voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone who still had a connection to his own humanity. "What's your name?" "Zeke." The kid was hyperventilating, words tumbling out between gasps. "Zeke Hartley. My mom is Diane Hartley, and my stepdad is Robert, and he hits her, and she won't call for help, and I didn't know what to do, and—" Okay, Zeke, you did the right thing. You did exactly right. Jack looked at his crew. "Sinclair Street, 3 blocks. Let's go." Tommy, a man in his 50s with prison tattoos and a face like weathered concrete, was already on his bike. "What are we walking into?" "Domestic. Kid says his stepdad's beaten his mom." Diesel, the president, the man who made decisions that shaped our lives, stared at Jack like he'd suddenly started speaking Mandarin. "Jack, we don't do this. We don't intervene in civilian shit. You know the rules." Jack looked down at Zeke, who was looking up at him with eyes that had seen too much, too young. Eyes that had somehow decided that 4 bikers were better protection than staying silent. Rules just changed. He put Zeke on the back of his bike, carefully, one hand supporting the child's waist, and fired the engine. The sound was a roar, a promise, a warning to the universe that something was about to shift. They rode like they were racing death itself. 3 blocks. Maybe 90 seconds, but it was enough time for Jack to understand what had been missing from his life for 6 years. This, purpose, the feeling of moving towards something instead of away from it, the sensation of mattering. Sinclair Street was quiet, tree-lined with older homes set back from the road, the kind of street where people kept their blinds drawn and their problems private, the kind of street where darkness could hide in plain sight. Jack pulled up to the address Zeke had screamed out, a 1-story ranch house with a detached garage and a front yard that needed weeding. The other bikes pulled in behind him, and suddenly the quiet street became a war zone of engine noise and leather and the physical presence of men who were done waiting. Tommy cut the engine and was off his bike in one fluid motion. Cruz, the youngest, was already moving toward the front door. Diesel stayed near the bikes, watching, calculating, the president already thinking 3 moves ahead. Jack set Zeke down on the porch, kneeling to meet the child at eye level. "I need you to stay right here, okay?" with Diesel. "Don't go anywhere. Don't go inside. You just stay right here and breathe, all right?" Zeke nodded, but his whole body was shaking. The adrenaline crash was hitting him. The realization that he'd made a choice, that he'd run toward strangers, that everything was about to change. Jack stood and moved toward the front door. He didn't knock. He tried the knob. Locked. He looked at Tommy, and Tommy understood without words. Tommy had been in the club since before Jack joined. Tommy knew how to break things.
Tommy's shoulder hit the door at exactly the right angle, right where the lock met the frame. The wood splintered like kindling. The door swung open. The sound that hit them next was worse than any scream. It was a woman's voice, pleading, "Please, Robert, please stop, you're going to kill me." And a man's voice, calm and measured and absolutely certain of his own rightness. "You need to learn. You need to understand what happens when you disrespect me." Jack crossed the threshold. The room was decent, furniture that had been chosen carefully once, maybe years ago before the violence had infected the space. There were family photos on a bookshelf. Diane and Robert on their wedding day, smiling. Zeke as an infant. Diane holding Zeke at the hospital, her face radiant with a joy that seemed impossible now. But the violence had rewritten the geography of the room. A lamp was overturned. There was glass on the carpet, and on the floor, pinned against the couch, was a woman with blood running from her nose and her left eye already swelling toward purple. Her face was the face of someone who had stopped believing rescue was possible. Robert was standing over her, his fist raised for another blow. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a business-casual shirt and slacks, looking like someone's middle manager, like someone's father, like someone's husband, like someone's monster. He turned when he heard them. His face cycled through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, anger, calculation, and finally a brief flash of fear that he tried to hide beneath a layer of aggression. "Who the fuck are you?" Robert's voice was still controlled, but it had changed. It had lost its certainty. Jack stepped forward. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he said, "You need to step away from her." "I need to do nothing. This is my house, my wife, my business. I suggest you leave before I call the police and report a home invasion." Tommy had come in behind Jack. Cruz was checking the rest of the house, making sure there was no immediate threat, no other people who needed help. Diesel remained outside with Zeke, a wall of leather and protection between a traumatized child and the world. "Last chance?" Jack said. Robert laughed. It was the laugh of a man who had gotten away with violence before, who had learned that most people looked away, who believed that his control was absolute. He raised his fist again, moving toward Diane. Tommy moved faster. What happened next was not as dramatic as people imagined violence. There was no slow-motion moment, no Hollywood choreography. Tommy simply grabbed Robert's wrist, not hard, not yet, but just firmly, and twisted. Not enough to break, but enough to make it clear that resistance was futile. Robert tried to pull away. Tommy didn't let go. "You're going to step back," Tommy said quietly. "You're going to put your hands behind your head. You're going to kneel down on that floor. And you're not going to move. You do all of those things, and nobody gets hurt worse than they already are. You don't do those things, and I'm going to make sure you understand what it feels like to be as powerless as you've made that woman." There was no rage in Tommy's voice. There was just the simple clarity of a man stating facts. Robert resisted maybe 3 seconds. Then, faced with the absolute certainty of consequences, he complied. He kneeled. He put his hands on his head. He became, for the first time in his life, someone else's prisoner. Jack knelt down beside Diane. Up close, the damage was worse. There was blood on her lips. Her left arm was held at an odd angle, possibly fractured. Her breathing was shallow, like even breathing hurt. She looked at Jack with an expression that broke his heart. Not gratitude, but confusion. This wasn't rescue. This was a further violation of her private hell. "Diane," Jack said gently, "your son Zeke came to find us. He's safe. He's outside, and we're going to get you help. I need you to tell me if you're injured anywhere else besides your face and your arm." Diane's voice came out like a whisper. "Why would you help me?" The question hung in the air. It was the wrong question asked at exactly the right moment, because Jack didn't have a good answer. He'd spent 6 years becoming a man who didn't help, didn't care, didn't intervene, and now here he was, breaking down a door and restraining a man and kneeling beside a stranger's trauma because a child had screamed. Because someone should have, Jack said finally. A long time ago, someone should have helped. So we're doing it now. He heard sirens in the distance. Someone, probably a neighbor, had called 911 when they heard the door break down, which was good, which meant documentation, which meant Robert couldn't lie his way out of this.
Diane started crying, not the quiet crying of someone trying to hide their pain, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone who realized, for the first time in years, that she didn't have to do this alone, that there were men who looked like criminals showing up for her, that her child had found help, that the nightmare might actually be ending. Jack kept one hand on her shoulder, not demanding anything, just present, just there. Cruz came back into the room. Kitchen's clear, bathroom's clear, looks like it's just the 3 of them in this house. "Get me some towels and some water," Jack said, "and find the kid's room. Get him some belongings, clothes, whatever he needs. We're not leaving him in this house." "Jack!" Diesel appeared in the doorway, his voice carrying the weight of authority and warning. "We need to talk about what we're doing here." Jack looked up from Diane. "We're helping. That's what we're doing. This is involving us in civilian justice systems. This is—" "I know what this is," Jack said, and his voice had hardened. "It's the first thing I've done in 6 years that actually matters. It's the first time I felt alive, and I'm not stopping." There was a moment of standoff. The president of the motorcycle club staring down one of his most senior members, calculating whether to pull rank or allow something unprecedented. Behind them, Robert was on his knees. In front of them, Diane was bleeding. Outside, Zeke was waiting for his mother to be still alive when she came back. "All right," Diesel said finally. "We do this, but we do this right. We document everything. We call a lawyer. We make sure this is airtight. No club business gets mixed up with civilian courts. Understood?" "Understood," Jack said. And as he said it, he felt something shift inside him. The moment when duty and personal redemption became one thing. The moment when a numb man decided to feel again. The moment when the world changed because 4 bikers and 1 terrified child refused to look away. The sirens got louder.
The police arrived at 4:51 p.m. 2 cruisers, lights flashing, turning Sinclair Street into a strobe light of red and blue. The officers who emerged were professional, trained, and immediately suspicious of 4 bikers standing in a broken-down house with a bleeding woman on the floor. Everybody step back, now. The first officer commanded, his hand resting on his belt in a way that suggested he was prepared for violence. Jack raised his hand slowly, making sure he was non-threatening. This was a dance he'd done before. Bikers and cops had an understanding. Things could go very wrong very quickly if someone misread the situation. "We called it in," Jack said calmly. "The kid ran to us asking for help. His stepdad was beating his mother. We separated them. That's it." The second officer, a woman named Officer Chen, according to her nameplate, was already moving to Diane, assessing her injuries with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen domestic violence before. She spoke into her radio. "We need an ambulance at this location. Female victim, possible broken arm, facial trauma, apparent assault in progress before arrival." Robert, still on his knees with his hands on his head, suddenly found his voice. "Officers, I want to press charges against these men. They broke into my home. They assaulted me. I'm the victim here." The first officer, a man in his 50s named Morrison, with the kind of face that had seen too much and trusted nothing, looked at Robert with the expression of someone who'd heard this exact lie 1,000 times before. "Sir, you're going to remain silent. You have the right to remain silent. But they—" "Silent." Officer Chen was helping Diane sit up carefully, asking gentle questions. "Can you tell me what happened? What's your name? Are you this man's spouse?" Diane's voice was barely audible. Diane Hartley. He's my husband. He got angry. I don't know why. He was just so angry and he wouldn't stop, and she trailed off, her eyes finding Zeke through the window. The child was still outside, with Diesel, and Jack could see the fear on Zeke's face even from inside the house. The fear that his mother might disappear. The fear that this rescue might not stick. "Is that your child outside?" Officer Chen asked gently. "Yes, that's Zeke, my son. He's 8. He called for help. He's very brave." Diane's face crumpled. She started crying again, but this time with a different quality. Less shock, more realization. The realization that her son had witnessed her destruction and chosen to act. The realization that she hadn't protected him from this by staying silent. She'd only made it worse. Officer Morrison turned to Jack. "I'm going to need statements from all of you, and I need to know why you were at the gas station, because right now this looks like 4 bikers decided to play hero, and I need to know if there's more to the story." "The kid came running to us screaming that his mother was being beaten," Tommy said, his voice steady and honest. "We asked where she was, we came here, we broke down the door, we separated them. That's the whole story. And the assault on Robert Hartley—" "We didn't assault him," Cruz interjected. "We restrained him. There's a difference." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Not in the eyes of the law, there isn't." This was the moment where things could go sideways. This was the moment where the system could decide that 4 bikers had committed a crime by intervening. Where rescue could become assault, where helping could be prosecuted. Jack felt the weight of it, the precariousness of doing the right thing in a system designed to protect abusers. "Officer," Jack said carefully, "that child is traumatized. That woman is injured. And that man," he gestured to Robert, still kneeling, "has clearly done this before. You can arrest us if you want to, but I'd suggest you get a warrant and search this house first. I'm betting you find evidence of a pattern." Morrison studied Jack for a long moment. There was a flicker of something in his expression. Recognition, maybe? Or the understanding that sometimes the law and justice weren't the same thing. "We'll see," Morrison said finally. "For now, everyone stays here until we get full statements." The ambulance arrived at 5:12 p.m. 2 paramedics, a young man named Derek and an older woman named Patricia, began assessing Diane with the efficient kindness of people who'd learned how to care for broken people without making them feel more broken. "We're going to take you to Boulder Community Hospital," Patricia said, wrapping an ice pack around Diane's swelling arm. "Get you x-rayed. Make sure nothing is seriously wrong. You're going to be okay." Diane kept asking about Zeke. "Can my son come? Can he come with me?" "We'll coordinate with the officers. But yes, he should come. He shouldn't be alone right now." Officer Chen was now taking detailed statements from each of the bikers. She was thorough, asking about the exact moment Zeke appeared, what they heard, what they did when they called 911. She wasn't hostile the way Morrison had been. She was professional, compassionate, and clearly documenting everything that could be used to protect Diane and prosecute Robert. "You did the right thing," she said quietly to Jack while taking his statement. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know what it looks like when a woman is about to get killed. You interrupted that. However this plays out legally, you interrupted that." "What happens now?" Jack asked. "That depends on her," Officer Chen said, nodding toward Diane. "If she presses charges, we have a case. If she doesn't, our hands are tied. Domestic violence is complicated because the victim has power in the system, sometimes. And if she recants, then we have nothing, and he walks." Jack felt something cold move through his chest. This was the thing nobody talked about, the thing that made domestic violence so insidious. The victim could be terrorized into silence even after rescue. "That won't happen," Jack said, but it came out like a prayer rather than a certainty. The real resistance came when Robert lawyered up. By 6:30 p.m., a man in an expensive suit named David Pritchard had arrived at the police station where Robert was being held. Pritchard was the kind of lawyer who specialized in making problems disappear, high-end, connected, the type who knew judges personally. Within an hour, Robert had been released on bail pending charges. Within 2 hours, Jack received a call from a detective named Wallace. "Mr. Reeves, I need you to know that Robert Hartley's legal team is already making noise. They're claiming this was a home invasion. They're claiming you assaulted their client. They're building a case against you and your crew. For what? We called the police. For breaking and entering, for assault, for unlawful restraint. They're arguing that regardless of what happened between Hartley and his wife, you had no legal right to enter that home or lay hands on their client. Jack's grip on the phone tightened. He was killing his wife. I believe you, Wallace said, and I think a jury would believe you. But we need Diane Hartley to press charges. We need her to testify. And right now, she's disappeared. What do you mean she's disappeared? I mean, she checked herself out of the hospital 2 hours ago, against medical advice, and she's not at any shelter we know of. Her phone is off, and we have reason to believe Robert's legal team has already contacted her. Jack's heart sank. This was the pattern. This was how it always went. The woman would be terrified of her abuser, of the court system, of losing her child, of the legal process. And she would choose silence. She would choose to recant. She would choose to protect her abuser. Where's the kid? Jack asked. Child Protective Services took him into urgent protective custody. He's safe. But Diane is his mother, and she has legal rights. If she recants, CPS will have to return him.
Zeke sat in a temporary foster home, a small house on the edge of Boulder belonging to a woman named Patricia who did this work because she believed in it and nowhere near for the money. The child was small on her couch, holding a stuffed animal that didn't belong to him, staring at nothing. Jack sat across from him, unsure how to be present for a child who had been through what Zeke had been through. "Your mom's gonna be okay," Jack said, though he didn't actually know if that was true. "She's tough, just like you." "She's scared," Zeke said quietly. "She's scared of Robert. She's scared of what he'll do if she doesn't go back. She's scared of losing me." "How do you know that?" "Because I'm scared of the same things, and I'm 8. The clarity of a traumatized child was devastating. Jack made a decision. He pulled out his phone and called Diesel. "I need the club, all of them, and I need a lawyer, the best one we can afford, because we're not letting this drop. We're going to find Diane, we're going to protect her, and we're going to make sure Robert Hartley understands that there are consequences." "Jack," Diesel's voice carried warning, "this is getting into territory that—" "I don't care about territory. This is about a kid and his mother. This is about doing what's right, and if the club won't back me, then I'll do it alone." There was a long silence. "Okay," Diesel said finally, "we're in, all of us, but we do this smart. We document everything, we work with the system where we can, we don't give them any ammunition to come after us." "Agreed." Jack hung up and looked at Zeke. "Your mom's going to be found, and she's going to be safe. I promise you that." But even as he said it, Jack understood the precariousness of the situation. He understood that the system was designed in ways that protected men like Robert. He understood that despite his best intentions, despite the crew's loyalty, despite everyone's desire to do the right thing, sometimes the right thing wasn't enough. Sometimes the darkness won. Sometimes the victim went back. And sometimes rescue had to be fought for again and again and again.
Diane Hartley was hiding in a motel room on the outskirts of Boulder, the kind of place where people went when they wanted to disappear. The room smelled like old cigarettes and regret. The carpet was stained with things she didn't want to think about. The bed sagged in the middle, and she was sitting on that bed, fully clothed, staring at her phone while it buzzed with text messages from a number she recognized. Robert. "Where are you?" "Diane, don't be ridiculous. Come home. The police are trying to turn you against me. Don't listen to them. I love you. You know I love you. I just lost control. It won't happen again. Please, please just come home. We can work through this." Each message was a hook, a line, a weight pulling her back toward the thing that was killing her. She'd left the hospital because she couldn't stay. Because lying in that hospital bed with a broken arm and a swollen face and nurses asking if she was safe had made everything real in a way she couldn't handle. Because the social worker had told her that Zeke was in foster care and that pressing charges might be the only way to get him back. and that pressing charges meant sitting in a courtroom and telling strangers about the worst parts of her life. Because Robert's lawyer had called her directly, which was apparently legal, and explained that if she pressed charges, he would fight for custody, that he would argue she was unstable, that she'd orchestrated the incident, that 4 bikers had traumatized their son, that she would lose Zeke. She couldn't lose Zeke, so she'd run instead. Not back to Robert, she couldn't do that yet, couldn't go back to that house where the violence lived in the walls, but away, into the gray space between options, between safety and destruction, between rescue and recapture. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Diane, it's Jack. Jack Reeves, from yesterday. Her breath clawed. The biker, the man who'd broken down her door, who'd separated her from her abuser, who'd looked at her bleeding face with something that looked like rage, not at her, but for her. How did you get this number? She asked. Detective Wallace gave it to me. He said you were missing. Diane, you need to come in. You need to press charges. That's the only way to keep Zeke safe. He said he'd take him from me. Her voice was small, broken. Robert's lawyer said he'd take him and I'd never see him again. That's not how it works. Isn't it? I'm poor, Mr. Reeves. I don't have a lawyer. I don't have money. Robert has both. Who do you think the court's going to believe? There was silence on the other end of the line. Jack understood in that silence the exact geometry of her trap, the way the system had been designed to keep women trapped, the way abusers weaponized the very institutions that were supposed to protect victims. What if we could help you? Jack asked finally. What if you didn't have to fight alone? Why would you help me? You don't know me. I know your son. I know what he saw. I know what he had the courage to do. And I know that if we don't help you, he goes back into that house with Robert, eventually. And next time, the beating might be worse. Next time your son might be the one getting hit. Diane made a sound that was halfway between a sob and a gasp. Come with me, Jack said. Let us help you, please. Jack found her at the motel because Diesel had hired someone to find her, a woman named Sarah, who did investigative work for lawyers and had a gift for locating people who didn't want to be found. By 10 a.m., Jack was knocking on room 237 at the Desert Sage Motel. Diane answered the door in stages, first just opening it a crack, then seeing his face and recognizing him, then opening it fully. She was still wearing the clothes from yesterday. Her left arm was in a sling. Her face was a palimpsest of bruises, purple and yellow and black, each shade telling a story of impact. Jack had to work to keep his expression neutral, had to remind himself that his anger wasn't helpful, that what she needed wasn't his anger at Robert, but his presence. Hi, he said simply. Hi. Are you ready to fight? Diane looked behind her at the motel room, at the half-empty coffee cup on the nightstand, at her single bag of belongings, at the visual evidence of a woman hiding from her own life. I'm terrified, she said. I know. But you're not doing this alone anymore.
By noon, Diane was sitting in an office in downtown Boulder with a lawyer named Margaret Chen, who specialized in domestic violence cases and worked with a nonprofit that took on cases pro bono for women who couldn't afford representation. Margaret was in her 50s, with the kind of calm competence that comes from years of fighting for people everyone else had given up on. Here's what we're facing, Margaret explained, spreading documents across her desk. Robert will claim this was a misunderstanding. He'll argue that he and you had a disagreement that got physical, but that it wasn't as severe as you've reported. He'll produce character witnesses who will testify to his stability. He'll argue that you're an unreliable narrator, that you're prone to exaggeration, that you're turning a domestic dispute into a criminal case out of spite. But he broke my arm, Diane said quietly. I know, and we have medical documentation of that. We have police photographs. We have the testimony of those 4 bikers, and potentially the officer who responded to the scene. But here's the thing. Domestic violence cases are notoriously hard to prosecute because the victim often recants. The system knows this. Robert's lawyer knows this, and he's betting that you'll get scared and drop the charges. What if I do? What if I just take Zeke and leave? Go somewhere else? Start over again? Then Robert will find you, Margaret said flatly. Men like Robert don't let go. They hunt. They control. They escalate. And next time, it might not just be you getting hurt. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I also need to be honest with you, Margaret continued. If you press charges and testify, Robert will countersue for custody. He'll argue that you're unstable, that you're being influenced by these bikers, that you're unfit to care for Zeke. We can fight it, but custody battles are expensive, and they're painful, and you'll have to relive all of this in front of a judge. But if I don't press charges, what happens to Zeke? He stays in foster care. The system views his home as unsafe because of Robert. You'd have to complete a safety plan, probably counseling, probably have to prove you can keep him safe. It's a process. It takes time. Diane felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. What do you recommend? She asked. Margaret leaned back in her chair. I recommend you press charges. I recommend you do the work. I recommend you let that motorcycle club help you because sometimes rescue comes from unexpected places, and you have to be willing to accept it. But I can't tell you what to do. This is your decision. By 3 p.m., Diane was sitting in a small house in a residential neighborhood, and the house belonged to Jack. It was a modest place, 3 bedrooms, a backyard, the kind of home that suggested a man had once tried to build something normal, before the club and violence and numbness had taken over. There were photos on the walls, Jack with his daughter at a birthday party years ago, Jack with his motorcycle crew, Jack looking younger, happier, before grief had calcified his features. Zeke can take the guest room, Jack said, showing her around. You can take the master. I'll take the couch or the other guest room, whatever you need. Why are you doing this? Diane asked. Really, not the noble reasons, the actual reason. Jack was quiet for a long moment. They stood in the kitchen, and he looked at her with an honesty that was almost painful. Because my daughter stopped speaking to me when she was 16, he said. Because I chose the club over her. Because I was too angry and too numb to be the father she needed. And because when I was standing over you yesterday, bleeding on your living room floor, I realized I was looking at someone else's daughter. Someone else's child was about to lose their mother, and I couldn't let that happen. Not when I could do something about it. Diane's eyes filled with tears. I'm not going to promise everything's going to be okay, Jack continued, but I'm going to promise that you're not alone anymore, that we're going to help you fight, that Zeke's going to be safe, and that whatever Robert throws at us, we're going to face it together. The crew, Diane said. They're helping me because you asked them to. They're helping you because it's the right thing, Jack corrected. Yes, I asked, but they're here because they chose to be, because they have daughters and sisters and mothers, because even bikers understand the difference between right and wrong, even when the world has taught them that nobody cares about the difference. Zeke was brought to Jack's house by a social worker named Roberto, who explained the conditions, supervised visitation initially, then full custody once Diane's safety plan was approved, ongoing check-ins, regular counseling for the child. When Zeke saw his mother, he ran. Not the running of a child who'd been traumatized, but the running of a child who'd been saved. He crashed into Diane with the full weight of his 8-year-old body, and she held him like she would never let go. Her broken arm cradled carefully, while her good arm pulled him tight. Jack watched from the kitchen doorway, his own throat tight. This was rescue. Not the dramatic moment of intervention, but this, the slow, painful work of rebuilding. The forced proximity that would either break them or remake them into something stronger. By evening, they were eating dinner together, Jack, Diane, and Zeke, at his kitchen table. Zeke was telling Jack about his soccer team. Diane was listening with a softness in her expression that suggested she was still remembering how to be simply present with her child, not constantly bracing for violence. And Jack was remembering what it felt like to be part of something that mattered.
Diane couldn't sleep. It was 2 a.m. on her third night at Jack's house, and she was lying in his guest bed, a comfortable bed, with clean sheets that smelled like fabric softener, in a room that was safer than anywhere she'd been in years, and her mind wouldn't stop. She kept replaying moments, Robert's hand connecting with her face, the sound of Zeke screaming, the police officer's sympathetic expression, Margaret Chen explaining custody law like it was a trap designed specifically to catch women like her. At 2:47 a.m., she got up and went to the kitchen for water. Jack was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a bottle of beer and a leather journal. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two people operating in the liminal space between trauma and recovery. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "My mind won't turn off." "Yeah, that happens." She sat across from him. The journal was open, and she could see his handwriting, careful, deliberate, the handwriting of someone who is learning to speak again after a long silence. "What are you writing?" she asked. He hesitated, then turned the journal toward her. It was a letter. "Dear Maya," it began, "I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I forfeited that right a long time ago, but I need you to know something. I need you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then." Diane's eyes filled with tears reading her story, not her story, but a story remarkably similar to hers. A man so consumed by his own pain that he'd abandoned his daughter, a man who'd chosen numbness over presence, and a man who was only now, decades later, understanding the damage he had caused. "Your daughter?" Diane asked softly. "Maya. She's 18 years old now, graduating high school next month. I haven't seen her since she was 16 and told me I didn't want me at her birthday party. Told me she was done having a father who showed up to tell her about club business, but never asked how school was going." "Have you sent these letters?" "No, probably never will. Her mother would just delete them anyway. But I keep writing them, because at least it's something. At least I'm acknowledging what I did." Diane sat with that for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Why did you really help us? And don't give me the redemption answer. Give me the real one." Jack closed the journal carefully, his weathered hands moving with unexpected gentleness. "Because I'm 42 years old, and I've spent the last 6 years being dead. Because your son's scream woke me up. Because looking at you reminded me that there are consequences to apathy. Because helping you is the closest I've come to making amends for the people I failed." That's a lot of weight to put on me. I know, and I'm sorry. That's not fair. You shouldn't have to be someone else's redemption arc. No, but maybe we can both be each other's. Maybe I can help you figure out how to talk to Maya, and you can help me figure out how to build a life that isn't defined by Robert. Jack looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah, maybe we can." The next morning, Diane began telling her story. Not all at once, but in fragments, over coffee, while Zeke was at school and Jack was sitting across from her, listening with the kind of attention that suggested he was actually hearing her, not just waiting for his turn to talk. She told him about her parents,
loving but rigid, with expectations about marriage and children and the trajectory of a normal life. She told him about college, where she had discovered design, had found something that made her feel alive and creative, and like she could build something beautiful. She told him about the first boyfriend who'd cheated on her, and how that had broken something in her belief in love. "That's when I met Derek," she said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "He was older, confident. He made me feel like I was special, like I was worth choosing." "What happened?" "I got pregnant. He told me to get an abortion. I said no. He left. And my parents told me I'd made my choice, and they couldn't support that choice. So I left too. I was 22 years old, with a baby, and no support system and no degree." She paused, taking a long sip of coffee. "I was working in a restaurant, doing freelance design on the side, barely keeping Zeke and me afloat. And then Robert came in one day. He was charming, he was successful, he had money, he said he loved me, he said he loved Zeke, he said he wanted to take care of us." "And you believed him?" Jack said gently. "I believed him because I needed to believe him. I was exhausted. I was lonely. I was terrified. I was failing as a mother because I couldn't give my son the life I wanted him to have. And Robert promised to fix all that." "When did it start?" "Slowly. First, it was just criticism. The way I dressed was too provocative. The way I interacted with my clients was too flirty. The way I spent money was irresponsible. Then it was isolation. He didn't like my friends. He didn't like my family. He preferred if I stayed home. And I told myself it was love. I told myself he was just protective, that he cared too much." And Jack's hands were clenched into fists, but his voice remained steady. "And the physical violence?" "Started about a year into the marriage. He said I'd embarrassed him at a work event, said I'd flirted with his boss. I told him I hadn't. He didn't believe me. And She trailed off, unable to finish. "You don't have to," Jack said. "I do. I have to say it out loud, or it stays secret. And I'm done with secrets." He pushed me into a wall. I hit my head. I had a concussion, but I didn't go to the hospital because I was afraid of what they'd ask. Then I made excuses. I said I fell. I said I was clumsy. I said I deserved it because I must have done something to provoke him. Tears streamed down her face now. And each time it happened, I told myself it would be the last time. That if I just tried harder, if I was just more careful, if I just loved him better, it would stop. But it didn't stop. It got worse. And Zeke started having nightmares. He started getting quiet. He started learning that love wasn't safe, that the people who were supposed to protect him were the ones hurting him. Until he decided to protect you instead, Jack said quietly. Diane nodded, unable to speak. That evening, Jack told his story. He and Diane were on the back porch watching the sun set over the Boulder Mountains. Zeke was inside doing homework. The world felt paused, quiet, held in amber. "I grew up in a house full of violence," Jack began. "My father was a mean drunk. My mother was a woman who stayed because she didn't believe she had options. I had 2 younger brothers. One of them, Tommy's actually my brother, though he's been more crew than family for so long people forget. We bonded over hating our father." He took a long pull from his beer. "When I was 18, I left, joined the club, thought I was escaping violence, didn't realize I was just trading one form for another. At 23, I met Maya's mother. She was beautiful and smart, and she saw something good in me. We got married. Maya was born a year later." "What was she like?" Diane asked. "Perfect. Pink and tiny, and she had this way of looking at me like I was the most important person in the world.
And I loved her so much it terrified me, because I knew what I carried inside me. I knew the violence that lived in my bloodline. Jack's voice grew quieter. So I threw myself into the club, thought distance was protection, thought if I wasn't around her much, I couldn't hurt her. But what I didn't understand was that abandonment is a form of violence too. It's a way of saying, you're not worth staying for. It's a way of teaching a child that love means leaving. Did you ever hit her? Diane asked gently. No, but I should have, because then maybe she would have gotten help. Maybe she would have understood that violence could come in many forms, and none of them were her fault. Instead, I just disappeared. I was present but absent, there but not there. And she learned that fathers weren't reliable, that men couldn't be trusted, that love was conditional. He looked at Diane. When she was 16, she told me she didn't want to see me anymore. Said it hurt too much to have a father who chose his motorcycle club over her. And I let her go. I told myself that was what she wanted, that distance was what I was supposed to provide. But the truth is, I was a coward. I was afraid of her rejection, so I rejected her first. Have you tried reaching out? Diane asked. Wrote letters, never sent them. Her mother remarried. Her stepfather is apparently a good man. He coaches her soccer team. He helps with homework. He shows up. Everything I should have been. It's not too late, Diane said. It might be. But even if it is, at least I can change how I show up for other people. At least I can look at a kid screaming for help and actually listen. At least I can look at a woman being destroyed and say, no, this stops now. The next day, Margaret Chen called with news. Robert's filed for emergency custody, she said without preamble. He's arguing that Diana's unstable, that she's being influenced by bikers, that she's making false allegations. The hearing is in 2 weeks. What do we do? Jack asked, putting the phone on speaker so Diane could hear. We prepare. We document everything. We get Diane into therapy, not because she needs it, but because the court will want to see it. We get character witnesses, we gather evidence of the pattern of abuse, and we make absolutely sure that when Diane testifies, she's ready. I'm not sure I can do this, Diane said, her voice small. You can, Margaret said firmly. You have your son depending on you. You have people who believe in you, and you have the truth. That's more powerful than Robert's expensive lawyer, even though it might not feel like it. That night, Jack made a decision. He called his ex-wife, Maya's mother. Sarah, it's Jack. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to ask you something. I need to ask if I can come to Maya's graduation. There was a long silence. I don't think that's a good idea, Sarah said finally. I know it's not. I know it's selfish, and it's probably going to make her uncomfortable, and you probably wish I would just disappear completely. But I'm asking anyway, because I'm trying to be a different kind of man, and that starts with showing up for the people I love, even when I'm afraid. Another silence. Let me ask her, Sarah said finally. But Jack, if she says no, you have to accept that. You don't get to push. You don't get to make her reconciliation her burden. I understand. Thank you for even considering it. He hung up the phone and looked at Diane, who was watching him with understanding in her eyes. You're learning, she said. We both are, Jack replied.
The therapist's office was soft, designed intentionally to be non-threatening, with warm lighting and plants and the kind of furniture that suggested safety. Dr. Lisa Martinez was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and the practiced calm of someone who'd heard every story trauma had to tell. Diane sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap, trying not to look terrified. This is just for us, Dr. Martinez said gently. Nothing you say here gets reported unless you're a danger to yourself or others. This is a space for you to process what's happened, to begin understanding how it shaped you, to start rebuilding yourself. I don't know where to start, Diane said. Start with right now. How are you feeling right now? Diane took a breath. Safer than I've been in years, terrified about the hearing, grateful for Jack and his friends, guilty that I'm grateful because I should be able to take care of myself, ashamed that I stayed with Robert for so long, angry at myself for not leaving sooner, angry at him for hurting me, confused about what love is supposed to feel like. Dr. Martinez nodded, writing notes. That's a lot of feelings to hold at once. I don't know how to separate them, Diane admitted. It all just feels like one big ball of panic. We'll work on that, but I want you to know something. Every single one of those feelings is valid. Shame is particularly tricky because we're taught that it's a personal failing. But shame isn't a personal failing. Shame is what abusers use to keep victims trapped. The fact that you feel it means he did his job well. Our job is to help you separate the shame that belongs to you, which is none of it, from the shame you've been carrying for him. Over the next 2 weeks, Diane went to therapy twice a week. She talked about her childhood, about a mother who'd loved her but modeled compliance, about a father who'd never questioned authority. She talked about the first time Robert had hit her and how she'd convinced herself it was an accident. She talked about the moments she'd wanted to leave but didn't because of fear, or financial dependence, or the belief that she deserved the punishment. And slowly, something began to shift. She started understanding that abuse wasn't about the victim's failings, but about the abuser's need for control. She started recognizing the patterns, the cycle of tension, incident, reconciliation, calm. She started seeing that Robert's apologies were never accompanied by change, only by promises that wore thinner each time. I wasted 5 years, she said during one session. You survived 5 years, Dr. Martinez corrected gently. That's not waste. That's what you needed to do to keep yourself and your child alive. And you kept Zeke alive. That's not failure. That's heroism. Zeke's therapy was different. His therapist, a man named Dr. David Kim, who specialized in childhood trauma, worked through play and drawing and storytelling. In one session, Zeke drew a picture of his old house with Robert as a giant monster towering over it. In another, he drew his mother with broken arms and sad eyes. But slowly, the drawings began to change. He drew Jack's house with windows that had light coming out of them. He drew himself and his mother smiling. He drew the bikers as superheroes, each with their own power. One afternoon, after a session, Zeke asked Jack if he could call him something. What do you mean? Jack asked, though he suspected he knew. Can I call you Jack still? Or can I call you something else? Something that means, I don't know, that you're my family? Jack's throat tightened. What would you want to call me? Mr. Jack? Or Zeke trailed off shy suddenly. Or what, buddy? Or Dad? Jack pulled the child into his arms and both of them cried. Jack for the daughter he had lost and might never get back. Zeke for the father figure he'd never had. Yeah, Jack said into Zeke's hair. You can call me Dad. 2 weeks before the custody hearing, Sarah called Jack back. Maya wants to see you, but she has conditions. Anything, Jack said immediately. You meet her at a coffee shop, public place. You don't make promises you can't keep. You don't cry or make it about your feelings. You listen to what she has to say, and you accept that this is a beginning, not a reconciliation. There's a lot of work to do if you two are going to have any kind of relationship. I understand. When? Saturday, 2 p.m. She'll text you the location. Jack hung up and went to find Diane, who was in his kitchen making dinner, something she'd started doing regularly, a small act of partnership that suggested she began to believe she could stay. My daughter wants to see me, he said. Diane set down the knife and turned to face him. Oh, Jack, that's incredible. I'm terrified. You should be. And you should go anyway.
The coffee shop was crowded, the kind of place where people worked on laptops and had meetings. Jack arrived 15 minutes early and sat at a table where he could see the door. Maya walked in at 2:03 p.m. She was 18, which meant Jack had missed 18 years of her becoming a person. She had his coloring, but her mother's face, and she looked at him the way you'd look at a stranger who might be dangerous. Jack didn't stand, didn't approach, just waited for her to come to him. Hi, Dad, she said, and the word sounded foreign in her mouth, like she was trying out a language she'd forgotten. Hi, Maya. Thank you for coming. She sat across from him, ordered a coffee she didn't drink, and looked at him with the kind of directness only teenagers possess. I'm graduating next month, she said. Marcus, my stepdad, he's helped me with college applications. I got into CU Boulder. I'm going to study environmental science. I'm doing well in school. I have friends.
I have a life. And I want you to know that I built all of that without you." Each sentence was a stone, and Jack let each one land. "I know," he said, "and I'm proud of you." "You don't get to be proud. You weren't there." "You're right. I wasn't. And I can't go back and change that. But I want you to know that it wasn't because of anything you did. It wasn't because you weren't worth staying for. It was because I was broken, and I didn't know how to be present for someone I loved." "Why should I believe that?" "You shouldn't," Jack said honestly. "You should be skeptical. You should protect yourself. Because I'm going to disappoint you, probably, but I'm going to try not to. And when I fail, I'm going to be honest about it." Maya studied him for a long moment. "I don't want a dramatic reconciliation," she said finally. "I don't want you showing up at my graduation and crying and making it about your feelings. I want you to show up, sit in the back, and let me have my moment. And then, maybe we can get coffee again and talk and see if there's anything there worth building." "Okay, I can do that. And Marcus is going to be the one helping me move into the dorm. I want that to be clear." "I understand. But you can help if you want to. Just don't make it a thing." Jack felt something in his chest ease slightly. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a beginning. It was a door opening, even if just a crack. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me this chance." Maya stood to leave. "Don't thank me yet. Just don't fuck it up." She left before he could respond. Jack sat in that coffee shop for another 30 minutes, holding a cold cup of coffee, and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The night before the custody hearing, Jack's crew gathered at his house. Tommy, Cruz, Diesel, and Reno sat around the living room while Diane went through her testimony with Margaret Chen one final time. Zeke was asleep upstairs, his stuffed animal clutched to his chest, finally sleeping without nightmares. "She's going to do great," Diesel said, and it sounded like an order rather than a prediction. "Robert's lawyer is going to come at her hard," Margaret had warned. "He's going to try to make her look unstable. He's going to try to suggest that she's being manipulated by you all." "Let him," Tommy said flatly. "We'll testify. We saw what we saw." "And we'll back her up," Cruz added. Jack watched his crew, these men he'd spent 2 decades with doing things that weren't always legal or ethical, and realized that this was what redemption looked like. Not grand gestures or miraculous transformations, but consistent choice. Choosing to show up, choosing to protect the vulnerable, choosing right when choosing wrong was easier. Margaret emerged from the kitchen, where she'd been working with Diane. "She's ready," she said, "and her testimony is solid. She knows what happened. She can articulate it. She's not confused or contradicting herself. If the judge has any sense of justice, he'll rule in her favor." "And if he doesn't?" Jack asked. "Then we appeal. We fight. But I don't think we'll have to. Robert's case is weak. His lawyer is banking on Diane being too scared to testify. He's not expecting her to show up and tell the truth." The next morning, Diane stood in the courthouse bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Her bruises had faded. The physical evidence of violence was gone, but she could still feel it, the memory of impact living in her skin. She was wearing a conservative dress that Margaret had helped her choose. She was wearing minimal makeup. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who survived, who was still surviving, who was choosing to speak her truth in a space designed to silence her. There was a knock on the door. Jack stood in the hallway, and he looked as nervous as she felt. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey, you're going to be amazing in there. You're going to tell the truth, and the truth is going to set you and Zeke free." "What if I freeze up? What if I can't do this?" "Then you do it anyway, because Zeke's in that courtroom, and he needs to know that his mother is brave enough to fight for him. He needs to see you stand up and say, 'I matter. My safety matters. My child matters.'" Diane took a shaky breath and nodded. They walked into the courtroom together.
The judge's name was Harold Brennan, and he had the kind of face that revealed nothing.
Diane sat in the witness box, her hand raised, swearing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The courtroom was packed. Jack and his crew in the back, Margaret Chen at the plaintiff's table, Robert and his lawyer David Pritchard at the defense table, and Zeke in the gallery with a court-appointed advocate because children weren't supposed to testify in custody cases, but they were supposed to have their interests represented. "Miss Hartley," Margaret began gently, "can you tell the court about the nature of your relationship with Robert Hartley?" Diane took a breath and began to speak. She told the court about the early days when Robert had seemed perfect. She told them about the isolation that came next. She told them about the first hit and how she'd convinced herself it was an accident. She told them about the cycle, tension, incident, reconciliation, calm, that had repeated over and over for 5 years. She spoke about specific incidents. The time he'd broken her collarbone and she'd told the hospital she'd fallen. The time he'd strangled her until she couldn't breathe and she'd worn scarves for a week. The time he'd locked her in the garage overnight because she'd talked to her mother on the phone. She told them about the day he'd beaten her so badly that her 8-year-old son had run into the street screaming for help. Her voice never wavered. Her hands never shook. She sat in that witness box and told the truth like it was a weapon. And it was. Robert's lawyer, David Pritchard, stood up for cross-examination. "Miss Hartley, you've accused my client of some very serious crimes. Have you ever been diagnosed with a mental health condition?" "No," Diane said calmly. "No psychiatric medications, no history of depression or anxiety?" "I have anxiety now, after years of abuse, but I didn't have it before." "So, you self-diagnose?" "I see a therapist who specializes in domestic violence trauma. She can testify to my mental health if you'd like." Pritchard smiled, a thin, predatory smile, and continued. "In your testimony, you mentioned that you were living with Mr. Jack Reeves, the man who broke into your home. How long have you been having a romantic relationship with him?" Margaret stood immediately. "Objection. Relevance." "Your Honor," Pritchard said smoothly, "the defendant's credibility is at issue. If she's in a romantic relationship with one of the men who allegedly rescued her, it suggests she might have motivation to lie about my client." Judge Harold Brennan considered this. "I'll allow it. Miss Hartley, please answer the question." "I'm not in a romantic relationship with Jack Reeves," Diane said clearly. "I'm living in his home because I need a safe place to live while I rebuild my life. He has been nothing but respectful and supportive." "Nothing but respectful?" Pritchard walked toward her. "You're living with a man with a criminal record, a man who's part of an outlaw motorcycle club, and you expect this court to believe there's nothing romantic about that?" "I expect this court to focus on the fact that your client beat me," Diane said, her voice hardening, "that he isolated me, that he controlled me, that he was about to seriously injure or kill me when my 8-year-old son had the courage to run for help. Whether or not I'm living with Jack Reeves is irrelevant to whether I'm a safe parent." "Is it?" Pritchard moved closer. "Is it irrelevant that you're exposing my client's child to known criminals, to gang members, to a lifestyle that—" "Objection." Margaret was on her feet. "Your Honor, this is argumentative and irrelevant." "Sustained," Judge Brennan said quietly. But the damage was done. The seed had been planted. Diane could see it in the judge's expression. The calculation, the consideration of whether a woman living with bikers was truly a safe environment for a child. Jack testified next. He spoke clearly about finding Zeke at the gas station, about driving to the house, about finding Robert beating Diane, about restraining Robert until police arrived. He spoke without defensiveness, without anger, just the facts. Jack's lawyer, David Pritchard's, cross-examination was brutal. "Mr. Reeves, you have a criminal record, correct?" "Yes." "How many arrests?" 17, but most of them are from when I was younger. I've only had one conviction in the last 10 years. "Which conviction was that?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Assault. 3 years ago. Bar fight. The other guy started it, but I finished it." "So, you're a violent man." "I'm a man who used to resolve conflicts violently. I'm trying to be different." "Trying? That's not very reassuring when we're discussing the safety of a child." Margaret objected, but the damage was compounding. By the time Tommy testified and then Cruz, the narrative had shifted. These weren't heroes.
These were criminals, and Diane was a vulnerable woman being manipulated by dangerous men into making false allegations against her husband. Robert testified in his own defense. He was smooth, he was controlled, he cried at exactly the right moments when talking about how much he loved his stepson, when describing the false allegations that were destroying his life, when expressing his concern about Diane's mental state. "Your Honor," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I love my wife. I love Zeke. These accusations are devastating, but I understand that sometimes women in crisis situations can create false narratives. I don't blame Diane. I think she's been influenced by these bikers who broke into our home. I think she's confused and scared and making terrible decisions. It was masterful. It was a performance designed to make Diane look unreliable, to make Jack and his crew look predatory, to position Robert as the real victim of this situation." During the lunch break, the cracks began to show. Diane sat in the bathroom stall and had a panic attack. Her breathing came in short, sharp gasps. Her hands went numb. She was back in that living room with Robert's fist raised, and she couldn't escape it. Margaret found her and held her while she cried. "This is exactly what he does," Diane said between gasps. "This is how he operates. He makes you doubt yourself. He makes you think you're crazy for believing your own experience. He twists everything until you don't know what's real anymore. He's doing it in court," Margaret said gently, "but the facts are still facts. You were beaten. That's documented. Zeke witnessed it. That's documented. Jack and his crew saw evidence of violence. That's documented. He can perform all he wants, but he can't change the objective reality of what happened. But the judge doesn't believe me. I can see it in his face. We don't know that yet." The final blow came when Pritchard presented his evidence.
He brought forward a series of texts between Diane and her sister, texts that Robert's team had somehow obtained. Later, it would be revealed that Robert had accessed Diane's old phone and extracted the messages. In these texts, Diane had written things like, "I hate him, but I love him, and I can't leave. Maybe if I try harder, he'll stop. I'm so tired of pretending everything is fine." Pritchard read them aloud in court, and with each one, he twisted the meaning. "As you can see, Your Honor, Miss Hartley has a history of emotional instability. She claims abuse, but these messages show someone struggling with relationship issues, not someone being systematically beaten. She hates him, but loves him. That's not the language of abuse. That's the language of a woman in a dysfunctional relationship who's making poor choices." "These texts prove abuse," Margaret objected. "These are the exact patterns of victims caught in cycles of violence." "Or they prove a woman with poor judgment," Pritchard countered. "A woman now living with criminals, making inflammatory accusations, trying to alienate a stepfather from his son. Your Honor, I'm requesting that custody be returned to my client pending a full investigation into whether Ms. Hartley is fit to parent, and I'm requesting that the court consider whether these bikers are engaging in a conspiracy to manipulate a vulnerable woman for their own purposes." The words hung in the courtroom like poison. Judge Harold Brennan called for a recess. He said, "I need to review the evidence. I'll issue my ruling tomorrow morning." As Diane walked out of the courtroom, she saw Robert, smiling. Not a real smile, but the smile of someone who knew he'd won. Pritchard clapped him on the back. They looked like men who'd just closed a very profitable deal. Jack tried to comfort Diane, but she pulled away. "He won," she whispered. "Somehow, he won." "The judge hasn't ruled yet," Margaret said, but even she sounded uncertain now. That night, Diane couldn't sleep. She lay in Jack's guest bed, the bed that had started to feel like home, like safety, and she listened to the sounds of the house. And she made a decision. If the judge ruled against her, she was going to disappear. She was going to take Zeke and run. She was going to become invisible. Because the alternative, Zeke going back to Robert, Zeke learning that the system protected abusers, Zeke growing up in that house, was unbearable.
She got out of bed and started packing. Jack found her at 3 a.m., folding clothes into a garbage bag because she didn't have a suitcase. "What are you doing?" he asked. "We're leaving. After the ruling tomorrow, if it goes the wrong way, we're leaving. I'm not letting my son go back to Robert. I don't care if it makes me a criminal. I don't care if I have to run for the rest of my life. I won't do it!" Jack stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "The judge hasn't ruled yet. We don't know what's going to happen." "I know exactly what's going to happen. I saw it on his face. He doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm a hysterical woman with poor judgment living with criminals. He thinks Robert is the victim, and tomorrow he's going to rule that Zeke needs to go back to his real family." "If that happens," Jack said carefully, "we fight it. We appeal. We don't run." "Easy for you to say. You're not going to lose your child." The words landed like a punch. Jack took a step back. "No, I'm not. I already did that. And I'm telling you, running doesn't solve anything. It just creates new trauma for Zeke, for you, for everyone. We fight. We stay. We hold the line." "You don't understand," Diane said, her voice breaking. "I can't lose him. I can't." "I know, and you won't. Not if we keep fighting." But even as he said it, Jack wasn't sure he believed it. The next morning, Judge Harold Brennan entered the courtroom looking grave. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of his footsteps and the rustle of papers. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented. This is a difficult case. There are credible accusations of domestic violence. There is also evidence of instability and poor judgment on the part of the mother. There are questions about the influence of third parties in this situation." Diane's hands clenched into fists. "However," the judge continued, "I cannot ignore the documented evidence. Medical records corroborate the injuries Diane described. Photographs taken by police officers corroborate the condition of the home. The testimony of multiple witnesses corroborate the presence of violence." He paused. "Therefore, I'm ruling in favor of Ms. Diane Hartley. Full custody of Zeke Hartley is awarded to his mother. Mr. Robert Hartley is ordered to pay child support and is limited to supervised visitation pending the outcome of criminal proceedings." The courtroom erupted. Jack and his crew stood and cheered. Margaret hugged Diane, who had collapsed into her chair, crying not from fear this time, but from relief so profound it felt like resurrection. But then something shifted. Robert's face went dark, dangerously dark. "This is bullshit," he shouted, standing up. "This is a goddamn conspiracy. You're all lying. You're destroying my life based on lies." "Mr. Hartley," Judge Brennan warned, "I suggest you compose yourself." "Compose myself? My wife is a liar. Those bikers are criminals. This court is corrupt." Security moved toward him. He was escorted out, still shouting, his lawyer following behind him with an expression that suggested this wasn't over. As Diane watched him leave, she felt something inside her shift. The victory didn't feel clean. It didn't feel safe. It felt fragile, like a piece of glass that would shatter if anyone breathed on it too hard. Robert had lost custody, but Robert had also lost everything. And a man with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous kind of man.
Robert violated the protective order 3 days after losing custody. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon while Diane was picking up Zeke from his new school, a different school in a different district, far enough from their old neighborhood that Robert wouldn't know where to find them. Except he did find them. Diane was walking Zeke to Jack's truck, the one she'd been borrowing while she got her life together, when she saw him, standing by the chain-link fence at the edge of the parking lot, wearing sunglasses like that would make him invisible, just watching. Not approaching, not violating the terms of the protective order in a way that was prosecutable, just there. A message, a threat, a promise that this wasn't over.
Diane's hands went numb. She hustled Zeke into the truck, locked the doors, and drove away with her heart hammering so hard she thought she might pass out. When she got home, Jack was in the garage working on one of the bikes. She told him what happened, and she watched his face transform from concerned to something harder, something that looked like the man who'd broken down her door weeks ago. "I'm calling the detective," he said. "It won't matter. He didn't technically violate the order. He was on public property. He didn't approach us. He'll say he was just walking by." "Then I'll handle it." "No!" Diane's voice was sharp. "You can't. If you confront him, he'll use it against us. He'll say you're violent. He'll say you threatened him. He'll try to get the custody ruling reversed." Jack's jaw worked. "So we do nothing?" "We stay vigilant. We document everything, and we wait." But waiting felt like drowning. Robert's campaign of terror was methodical. He didn't break the protective order overtly. He was too smart for that. Instead, he did things that were technically legal, but psychologically devastating. He drove past Jack's house, slowly, deliberately, making sure they saw him. He parked across the street from Zeke's school at pickup time. He sent flowers to Diane's therapy office with a note that read, "I still love you. I forgive you. Come home." He created fake social media accounts and sent friend requests to everyone Diane knew, spreading rumors that she was mentally unstable, that she'd fabricated the abuse, that she'd manipulated good men into becoming criminals on her behalf. He filed a motion to modify the custody agreement, claiming new evidence had emerged that Diane was unfit. He was systematically deconstructing the fragile safety she'd built piece by piece, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Margaret called on a Friday morning with news that made Diane's stomach drop. "Robert's lawyer has filed for an emergency hearing. They're claiming you're alienating Zeke from his stepfather. They're claiming you're living in an unsafe environment. They're requesting that custody be transferred back to Robert pending a full evaluation." "Can they do that?" Diane's voice was barely above a whisper. "They can try. Whether they'll succeed is another question. But, Diane, we need to be realistic. Robert's lawyer is very good at what he does. He's building a narrative that you're unstable and that Jack and his friends are a dangerous influence. If we're not careful, the judge might reconsider." "What do I do?" "You stay the course. You keep going to therapy. You keep Zeke in school. You don't engage with Robert. You document every time he violates the spirit of the protective order, even if he's not violating the letter of it. And you prepare yourself for the possibility that this gets worse before it gets better." After hanging up, Diane sat at Jack's kitchen table and stared at nothing. She'd won. The judge had ruled in her favor. She had custody. She had safety. She had a chance to rebuild. And somehow, she was still trapped. That night, Jack made a decision he'd been avoiding. He called a meeting with his crew at the pit stop, the bar where they held church, club business that required privacy and trust. Tommy, Cruz, Diesel, and Reno sat around the table in the back room, and Jack stood before them like a man asking for forgiveness before committing a sin. "Robert Hartley is escalating. He's terrorizing Diane. He's violating the spirit of the protective order without technically breaking it, and his lawyer is building a case to get custody reversed." "So what do you want to do?" Diesel asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "I want to send him a message. Not violence, just a conversation, a reminder that his actions have consequences." "Jack," Tommy said carefully, "we've already stuck our necks out for this woman and her kid. We testified in court. We're on record. If we get involved any further, especially in a way that could be construed as intimidation—" "I know," Jack interrupted. "I know the risks. That's why I'm not asking you to come with me. I'm telling you what I'm going to do, alone. And I need you to understand that this isn't club business. This is personal. If it goes sideways, it's on me." Diesel leaned back in his chair, studying Jack. "You're in love with her." "What?" "The woman, Diane. You're in love with her. That's why you're willing to throw everything away." Jack opened his mouth to deny it, then stopped. Because Diesel was right.
somewhere between breaking down that door and holding Diane while she cried and watching her rebuild herself one organic piece at a time, he'd fallen in love with her. Not the dramatic, explosive kind of love, the quiet kind. The kind that showed up every day, the kind that made you want to become a better person because someone was worth the work. "Yeah," Jack said finally, "I am. And if you go talk to Robert and he calls the cops and you get arrested, what happens to her then?" "Then she figures it out. She's stronger than she thinks." "That's not the point," Cruz said. "The point is you're about to do something stupid out of love and we can't let you. You can't stop me." Tommy stood. "You can, and we will. Jack, listen to me. You go near Robert Hartley, you're playing exactly into his narrative. You're proving that you're violent, that you're dangerous, that Diane can't be trusted to make good decisions because she's associating with criminals. You want to help her? Stay away from him." Jack's hands clenched into fists. "So we do nothing?" "We do what we've been doing. We support her, we document everything. We let the system work." "The system doesn't work." "Sometimes it does, slowly, imperfectly, but it does. And you throwing a punch at Robert Hartley isn't going to speed it up. It's just going to make everything worse." Jack went home that night knowing his crew was right and hating them for it. He found Diane in the living room, Zeke asleep upstairs, a glass of wine in her hand that she wasn't drinking. "You okay?" he asked. "No, but I'm functional. That's something." He sat beside her on the couch, close but not touching, respecting the boundaries she'd drawn. "I want to fix this. I want to make him disappear. I want to erase him from your life so completely that you forget he ever existed. I know. But I can't, because if I do, it makes everything worse for you. I know that too." They sat in silence for a long moment. "Can I ask you something?" Diane said finally. "Anything." "Why are you doing this? Really doing this, not the redemption story, not the daughter you lost, the real reason." "I love you." The words hung in the air between them. Diane turned to look at him and her eyes were full of tears. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know you're brave. I know you fight for your son even when you're terrified. I know you're rebuilding yourself from nothing. I know you make instant coffee and you fold laundry with precision that suggests you're trying to control something in a world that feels uncontrollable. I know you cry in the shower so Zeke won't hear. I know you're the strongest person I've ever met. I'm a mess. So am I. Maybe we can be a mess together." Diane laughed, a wet, broken sound. "That's the worst love confession I've ever heard. I'm out of practice." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, and they sat like that until the wine went warm and the night grew quiet. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. Diane spent the weekend preparing with Margaret, going over testimony, anticipating questions, steeling herself for another round of Robert's gaslighting. On Sunday night, she couldn't sleep. She got up at 2 a.m. and went to check on Zeke. He was sleeping peacefully, his stuffed animal clutched to his chest, his face relaxed in a way it hadn't been when they lived with Robert. She stood in his doorway and made a choice. She was done being afraid. She was done letting Robert dictate the terms of her life. She was done shrinking herself to avoid his rage.
Tomorrow, she would walk into that courtroom and she would tell the truth again and again and again until someone listened, until the system worked, until her son was safe. And if the system failed, then she would do what she should have done years ago. She would choose herself. She would choose her son. She would choose safety, even if that meant running. But she would try the right way first. Jack found her in Zeke's doorway and stood beside her. "You ready?" he asked quietly. "No, but I'm going anyway." That's what brave looks like. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She looked at him, this man who'd broken down her door,
who'd held her while she cried, who'd offered his home and his protection, and eventually his heart. "If we lose," she said, "if the judge rules against me, we won't. But if we do, I need you to let me go. I need you to let Zeke and me disappear. I need you to not try to find us. Can you do that?" Jack's face went pale. "You're asking me to abandon you?" "I'm asking you to trust that I know what's best for my son. That if I have to choose between the law and his safety, I'll choose his safety every time. Diane, promise me." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes, the desire to protect her, the understanding that sometimes protection meant letting go, the knowledge that love sometimes required sacrifice. "I promise," he said finally. "If you run, I won't follow." She kissed him, brief, gentle, a thank you and a goodbye and a hope, all at once. Then she went to her room and tried to sleep. Monday morning arrived like a death sentence. The courtroom was the same. Judge Harold Brennan was the same. Robert and his lawyer were the same. But something had shifted in Diane. She sat in that witness box and she looked Robert directly in the eyes, and she spoke. She spoke about every bruise, every threat, every night she'd lain awake wondering if this would be the time he killed her. She spoke about the psychological torture of loving someone who hurt you. She spoke about the shame of staying and the courage it took to leave. And then she said something that wasn't in her prepared testimony. "Your Honor, I know that custody cases are complicated. I know that you're trying to do what's best for my son. But I need you to understand something. Robert Hartley is not a father. He's a predator. And if you give him access to my child, you're not protecting Zeke. You're ensuring that he grows up believing that violence is love, that control is care, that the people who hurt you are the people you're supposed to trust." She took a breath. "So I'm asking you, begging you, to see what I see, to understand that safety isn't negotiable, that my son deserves better than supervised visits with a man who terrorized us. He deserves peace. He deserves childhood. He deserves to grow up without fear." The courtroom was silent. Judge Brennan looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you, Miss Hartley," he said. "I'll take that under advisement."
Judge Harold Brennan took 3 days to issue his ruling. 3 days of Diane barely sleeping. 3 days of Zeke asking if they were going to have to leave. 3 days of Jack pacing his house like a caged animal, unable to fix what was breaking, unable to protect the people he loved from a system that moved at its own glacial pace. On Thursday afternoon, Margaret called. "The ruling is in," she said. "Judge Brennan wants everyone back in court tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. "What does that mean?" Diane asked, her voice tight. "It means we're going to find out if justice actually exists." Friday morning, the courtroom was packed. Jack and his entire crew sat in the back. Tommy, Cruz, Diesel, Reno, and even some of the other club members who'd heard about the case and wanted to show solidarity. Word had spread through Boulder's biker community. One of their own was fighting for something that mattered, and they were going to be there. Diane sat at the plaintiff's table with Margaret, her hands folded in her lap, trying to breathe through the panic. Robert sat across the aisle with David Pritchard, looking calm and confident, like a man who believed the system would protect him, like a man who'd never faced real consequences in his life. Judge Brennan entered and everyone stood. He was an older man, mid-60s, with gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, and he carried a folder that held Diane's entire future inside it. "Please be seated," he said. The courtroom settled into silence so profound that Diane could hear her own heartbeat. Judge Brennan opened the folder and began to read. "This court has reviewed all testimony, all evidence, and all motions filed by both parties. This is not an easy case. Domestic violence cases rarely are. They require the court to balance competing interests, the safety of the victim, the rights of the accused, and most importantly, the best interests of the child." Diane's fingernails dug into her palms. Mr. Robert Hartley has argued that his wife is unstable, that she has fabricated allegations, and that she is being unduly influenced by individuals with criminal histories. He has requested that custody be returned to him pending a full psychological evaluation of Ms. Hartley. Diane felt the floor drop out from under her. However, Judge Brennan continued, and that single word made her breath catch, this court finds Mr. Hartley's arguments to be without merit. Robert's face went dark. The evidence presented is overwhelming and consistent. Medical records document injuries consistent with Diane's testimony. Police photographs corroborate the condition of the home. Multiple witnesses, including law enforcement officers, testified to observing signs of domestic violence. Diane's therapy records indicate a pattern consistent with abuse victims, not fabrication. Judge Brennan looked directly at Robert. Furthermore, this court is deeply troubled by Mr. Hartley's behavior following the initial custody ruling. While he has not technically violated the protective order, his actions, repeatedly appearing near Diane's residence and her child's school, sending unwanted communications, filing frivolous motions, constitute a pattern of harassment designed to intimidate and control. The judge's voice hardened. This court will not reward such behavior. Therefore, I am ruling as follows. Full legal and physical custody of Zeke Hartley is awarded to his mother, Diane Hartley. Mr. Robert Hartley's parental rights are suspended pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. He is ordered to have no contact, direct or indirect, with Miss Hartley or the child. The protective order is extended for 3 years and will be enforced with zero tolerance. Any violation will result in immediate arrest and prosecution. The courtroom erupted. Jack stood along with his entire crew, and they were cheering. Not the quiet, respectful applause of a courtroom, but the loud, defiant celebration of people who'd watched justice actually happen for once. Diane collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Margaret wrapped her arms around her, and they cried together. The lawyer who had fought for dozens of women just like Diane, and the woman who had finally been believed. Robert's face had gone from dark to something else entirely, something cold and calculating and dangerous. He stood, pushing his chair back so hard it clattered to the floor. "This is bullshit," he shouted. "You're destroying my life based on lies. She's a liar. Those bikers are criminals. This entire court is corrupt." "Mr. Hartley," Judge Brennan's voice was ice, "you will compose yourself immediately or you will be held in contempt." "Contempt? Contempt?" Robert's voice was rising, his control finally shattering. "I have been held in contempt this entire time. My rights have been violated. My reputation has been destroyed. All because some woman decides to play victim and—" "Bailiff, please escort Mr. Hartley from my courtroom," Judge Brennan said calmly, "and prepare a contempt citation. 30 days. Security moved toward Robert. He tried to resist, but they were professionals, and he was just a man whose carefully constructed facade had finally collapsed. As they let him out, he turned back to look at Diane one last time. "This isn't over," he said, and it sounded like a promise and a threat. But Diane didn't flinch. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what he was, a small, broken man whose power came from making others smaller and more broken. "Yes," she said clearly, "it is." Outside the courthouse, Diane stood in the Colorado sunshine and breathed. Just breathed. Zeke was being brought from school by the social worker, and he'd be there in 20 minutes. But for now, in this moment, Diane allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years, free. Jack stood beside her, not touching, just present. "You did it," he said. "We did it. No, you did it. You're the one who found the courage to leave. You're the one who testified. You're the one who stood up and said, 'No more.' I just held the door open." Diane turned to look at him. "You did more than that. You showed me what help looks like, what real partnership looks like, what it means when someone shows up not because they want something from you, but because they want something for you." "So what happens now?" Jack asked. "Now?" Diane smiled, a real smile, the first one in so long. "Now, I figure out how to live. Not just survive, but actually live. I finish school, I build my business, I give Zeke a childhood, I learn how to be someone who isn't defined by trauma. And us?" She reached for his hand. "Us too.
If you're willing to be patient, if you're willing to understand that I'm going to have bad days and panic attacks and moments where I push you away because I'm scared, I can do patient. And if you're willing to keep working on things with Maya, because Zeke needs to see that fathers can be good, that men can be safe, that relationships don't have to hurt. I'm working on it. She agreed to have dinner next week, just the two of us. It's a start. It's more than a start. It's everything. Zeke arrived 20 minutes later, and when he saw his mother standing outside the courthouse, he ran. Not the panicked running of a child fleeing danger, but the joyful running of a child who knew, finally, that he was safe. Diane caught him and held him, and he wrapped his small arms around her neck and said, "Did we win, Mama?" "Yeah, baby, we won." "So we get to stay with Jack?" "We get to stay with Jack." "And Robert can't hurt you anymore?" "No, sweetheart, he can't hurt me anymore." Zeke pulled back to look at her face, and his 8-year-old eyes were old beyond their years, but also tentatively hopeful. "Does that mean I can stop being scared all the time?" Diane's heart broke and healed simultaneously. "Yeah, baby, you can stop being scared." 6 months later, Diane stood in the small office space she'd rented in downtown Boulder. Just a single room, but it was hers. The sign on the door read, "Hartley Design Studio." She'd finished her degree online, she'd built a client roster, she'd created a website, she was making enough money to contribute to expenses at Jack's house, which had become their house, even though they still maintained separate bedrooms, because healing wasn't linear, and she needed space to figure out who she was outside of trauma.
Zeke was thriving. His nightmares had decreased. His therapist said he was processing the trauma in healthy ways. He'd joined a soccer team, and Jack coached it, awkwardly at first because Jack didn't know anything about soccer, but with the kind of earnest determination that made the kids love him anyway. And Jack was different. He'd reconnected with Maya. It was slow, fragile, often painful, but they were talking. She'd invited him to her college orientation. He'd helped her move into her dorm. They weren't close, not yet, but they were trying, and trying was enough. The motorcycle club had changed too. Diesel had started a community outreach program, partnering with domestic violence shelters, offering protection and support to women trying to leave abusive situations. They called it the Safe Passage Initiative, and it had grown beyond Boulder to other chapters across Colorado. Tommy had become a spokesperson for the program, doing interviews about how even people with criminal pasts could choose to be part of the solution. Cruz was working with legislators to improve protective order enforcement. Reno had started teaching self-defense classes at the women's shelter. They weren't perfect. They were still bikers. They still had their own demons and their own violence, but they'd learned that strength wasn't about intimidation. It was about showing up for people who needed protection. On the 6th-month anniversary of the custody ruling, Diane organized a community event at a local park. It was billed as a family day, games for kids, food trucks, live music, but it was really a celebration, a statement, a way of saying, we survived and we're building something beautiful from the ashes. The entire biker crew came. Margaret Chen came with her family. Dr. Martinez came. The social workers who'd helped Zeke came. The police officers who'd responded that first day came. Even some of Diane's old clients, people who'd stuck with her through the chaos, came to support Diane. And in the middle of all of it, Diane watched Zeke play soccer with other kids, his face bright with joy, and she felt something she'd forgotten how to feel. Pride. Not just pride in surviving, pride in thriving. Jack found her standing alone watching the crowd. "You did this," he said, gesturing to the gathering. "We did this." "Always correcting me," he said with a smile. "Someone has to keep you humble." He took her hand, tentatively, because he always asked permission now, always made sure she was ready, and she squeezed back. "I have something to tell you," Jack said. "Good something or bad something?" "Good, I think. Maya called last night.
She wants me to meet Marcus, her stepdad. She said she thinks it would be good for us to talk, father to father, about how to co-parent someone you love." Diane's eyes filled with tears. "Jack, that's incredible." "I'm terrified." "You should be, and you should do it anyway." "Where have I heard that before?" "It's good advice. I should trademark it." As the sun began to set over Boulder, casting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, the crowd gathered for one final thing. Diane had asked to say a few words, though she hadn't told anyone what she planned to say. She stood on a small makeshift stage, microphone in hand, looking out at faces that represented her journey from darkness to light, from victim to survivor, to something beyond survivor, someone who was simply, beautifully, herself. "I want to thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady. 6 months ago, I was convinced my life was over. I was convinced that I would never escape the man who'd hurt me. I was convinced that the system wouldn't protect me, that nobody would believe me, that I was alone."
She paused, looking at Jack, at his crew, at Margaret, at all the people who'd shown up. "I was wrong. Not about the system. The system is broken in so many ways and needs so much work. But I was wrong about being alone. Because when I couldn't protect myself, other people stepped in. When I couldn't find my voice, other people amplified it. When I couldn't believe I deserved safety, other people insisted I did." Her voice grew stronger. "This event isn't just about celebrating survival. It's about celebrating community. It's about proving that we can show up for each other, even when, especially when, it's hard. It's about showing my son and every other child here that violence doesn't have to be the end of the story, that love doesn't have to hurt, that families come in all forms, and sometimes the people who save you are the ones you least expect." She looked directly at Jack. "Sometimes they're bikers with criminal records and rough exteriors and hearts bigger than mountains. Sometimes they're lawyers who take cases they can't afford to take. Sometimes they're therapists and social workers and judges who choose to believe women. Sometimes they're entire communities who decide that enough is enough." Tears streamed down her face now, but she was smiling. "So thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for proving that rescue is possible. And thank you for reminding me that I was never broken. I was just breaking free." The crowd erupted into applause. Jack moved through the crowd toward the stage, and when he reached her, he pulled her into his arms. "I love you," he said into her hair, loud enough for everyone to hear, not caring about the audience, just needing her to know. "I love you too," she whispered back. And in that moment, surrounded by people who'd chosen to care, Diane understood something profound. She was no longer the woman who'd been beaten on a living room floor while her son screamed for help. She was the woman who'd fought back. The woman who'd chosen herself. The woman who'd built a life from nothing but courage and stubborn hope. The woman who'd learned that sometimes the wrong people turn out to be exactly the right people. The woman who'd discovered that love, real love, looked like a biker with a criminal record saying, "I'll hold the door," and meaning it every single day. 2 years later, Jack stood in a small chapel in Boulder, watching Diane walk down the aisle. She wore a simple white dress. Zeke walked beside her, holding her hand, 10 years old now and beaming with pride. Maya sat in the front row, next to her mother Sarah and her stepfather Marcus, all of them there because Jack had earned his way back into his daughter's life, one honest conversation at a time. The biker crew sat on Jack's side, looking uncomfortable in their dress clothes but grinning anyway. Tommy was Jack's best man. Margaret Chen sat with her family, dabbing her eyes. Dr. Martinez was there. The social workers were there. The judge, Judge Brennan, was there because he'd asked to come, said he didn't get to see many happy endings and wanted to witness this one. And when Diane reached the front and Jack took her hands and the officiant asked if they promised to love each other through darkness and light, through trauma and healing, through every hard day and every beautiful one, they both said yes. Not because the journey was over, but because they had learned that the best journeys never really end. They just keep becoming something new. Have you ever witnessed someone stepping up when they didn't have to? Maybe it was a stranger, a neighbor, or someone society told you to fear, but they showed up anyway and changed everything. Or maybe you were that person for someone else. This story is proof that heroes don't always look like we expect them to. Sometimes they wear leather jackets and have rough pasts. Sometimes they're terrified single mothers finding courage they didn't know they had. Sometimes they're entire communities deciding that silence isn't an option anymore. Drop your story in the comments. Tell us about a time when unexpected help arrived or when you became someone's unexpected hero. Let's build a thread of hope that reminds us all we're stronger together and rescue is always possible when people choose to care.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you loved this story, you will definitely love the next one. It's more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So go ahead and watch it now. Click on the image on your screen right away to watch the next one. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It helps and encourages us to share the best human interest stories you'd love.